All right, welcome everyone. Today's July 9th. It's been a quiet couple weeks. We had Cloud Native Security Con in Seattle, I guess 2 weeks ago. Super cool to see. One thing very relevant to our community is GitHub announced the general availability of artifact attestations for GitHub Actions. So very, very excited to see that. So that's producing Sigstore signed salsa provenance, both for public and private repositories for GitHub Actions. And I'll go dig up a link as well to drop that in. So very, very excited, and congrats to everyone at GitHub for that major launch. As for project updates, we don't have a lot right now, just given US holiday last week. There wasn't a lot of ongoing developments. One thing I'll just mention, we're going to cut some new releases for Fulcio and for Cosign. There's been a few things going on in Cosign, one of which was support for CA certificate pools for verification. This is a request by one of the community members. So rather than providing a chain, you can provide a pool, a root, a set of roots, and a set of intermediates in order to verify artifacts. If you're interested as well, there was a conversation in the protobuf specs repo a little while ago as well about trying to add support for pool verification. Since again, right now we require specifying chains. And so some folks say, well, I'd rather have just a pool. And for what it's worth, I think this syncs up very well with Golang as well, given that verification is by pools and not by chains. So I'll leave links to all of that as well. But yeah, that's kind of been the ongoing discussions there. Ian, did you want to talk a little bit about the EKU issue, if you wanted to kind of summarize that?
Yeah, I'll put it here in the chat too, the issue that I'm referencing. So I appreciate, Hayden, thank you for jumping in and adding some context there. Yeah, so I think we're running into this kind of issue where the root certificate that we're using with Fulcio, our PKI team is really kind of resistant about having the AKU bit set in it. I understand that Fulcio, when it issues certificates, does not have that bit, but they're still pretty concerned about it. And right now, Cosign verifies that EKU bit is set. So I think it's more like, it's kind of like, is there a way to build consensus and to update Cosign where that bit may not, checking of that bit may not be necessary. I don't know the history here so much about why that bit is being checked right now. But I'll use the word code signing here as in binary code signing requirement doesn't seem to be in line with maybe the objectives of what Fulcio certificates are trying to do.
So historically, the motivation for setting that bit was simply that seemed to have been what a lot of folks did for code signing certs. You know, this is somewhat getting into the semantics of what exactly is code signing, and it seems like RFC 5280 has a specific definition for what code signing is, which is what Jeff talked about in this issue. And there's maybe a more modern interpretation now of what code signing means that doesn't sync up with what the RFC is. And I think another complication here is the CAB forum also has a definition for what code signing is, in which they do say, set this EKU. Code signing in that sense is talking a bit about code signing on, I guess, maybe platforms and ecosystems where there's a bit more regulation around that, not government regulation, but just restrictions around what's being code signed. So, I mean, I'm mostly talking kind of more platforms like Windows or Mac OS. Whereas we've always kind of considered ourselves private PKI, so we don't necessarily have to be conformant to 5280 or to what the CAP form requires. That's not to say that like our goal is to, where possible, align with specification, because existing tooling out there ideally can support verification of what we're doing. I think where there's gaps in tooling verification would be around transparency, which is where like Sigstore tooling is necessary. But if you're talking just about verification of code signing certs. Ideally, existing tooling out there supports it. So this is kind of a long-winded way of saying this is why that bit was set originally. I don't think we were also aware of one of the other bits that I was reading a little bit about the document signing bit that seemed to be introduced more recently. And I believe Cab also even calls that out as well. This is something Jeff was talking about. I guess maybe one other consideration as well is just recognizing kind of the current state of things, that if we have certificates where that isn't set, Sigstore clients will fail to be able to verify it since they expect that bit set. Of course, again, we can say, well, let's update the Sigstore spec so that that bit becomes optional. At that point, we're just kind of weighing, is that worthwhile? I don't know if you're talking about something where it's going to be, purely private verification. You're building your own sort of clients to do this. So yeah, I'll pause here for a second. I guess, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that last statement is something that we did consider, is forking and maintaining our own versions of clients without that requirement for that bit to be checked. But ultimately, I think that prohibits, I'd say, at least in our instance, it shrinks the ecosystem of tooling that's available to us pretty dramatically, and we didn't want to do that. We really want to be all in on this ecosystem. So that's kind of like part of our internal discussions. I don't think there's any request or desire to see the public instances of these change how they are set up. I think it was purely to see if there's ability to maybe make it optional on the client verification. And I know it's kind of hard when you look at Sigstore. Like, I know there's like the conformance to the spec, and then there's all the tooling. And we could certainly make it optional just on cosign, but that doesn't really solve the problem. Or we could make it optional on cosign with the default behavior still as it works today, but then that gets a little hairy for everything else. I think it's just right now we're trying to, I'm not sure if there's others who have this problem, right? And I think I'm more than happy to go back and push back on our PKI team about that. If others feel strongly that this is not the direction to go. But their kind of position right now is for us to look at it and say, like, hey, this really should be optional, so that those who do want to sign their root certificates with this bit have that as a requirement, and they can use that. Mm-hmm. But then the choice is kind of up to us as a private Sigstore deployment to not have it set. Right now, we don't have that choice in how we set up a private Sigstore deployment.
So yeah, I guess two thoughts there. So one, yeah, I very much recognize that there are these use cases effectively like bring your own PKI, which is something that, as you might have noticed from our tooling, cosign is probably the furthest along in trying to support that, whereas a lot of other tools are just not as flexible because they were designed around verification primarily from the public instance, though more accurately conforming to Fulcio certificate profile. So you can always operate your own instance of Fulcio, but it's expecting all the various bits are set. So that's maybe one thing here to note. The other thing, I was looking over this issue again. I'd forgotten one point that was brought up a little while ago was the concern that when that code signing bit is set, I don't recall, I think, was Windows explicitly called out here? Yeah, that it would allow a maliciously or misissued code signing certificate to be able to be trusted on the machine. And this was one place I think one community member had pushed back a little bit, basically saying, well, to get to that state, you should already be trusting Sigstore's root certificate, or whatever your private root is. So we were a little confused there, I guess, on that argument. That maybe is one question I'd have for the security team to dig a bit into.
Yeah, I just say more than anything else. This is me being a complete idiot around PKI and trying to convey what I had heard. I think I misunderstood what was being said at the time by our PKI team. So they reached out and told me, yeah, that's not right, and I just didn't update it in the issue. So yeah, I would say it's kind of a moot point.
Okay. Yeah, because I guess the main thing I'm looking for here is this something on like semantics that because we're not following 5280, that's a concern? Is this just, again, we can kind of abstract this problem away and say, regardless of EKUs, you as a client have a particular need that the tooling doesn't meet right now. If that's what it is, that's honestly kind of how I like approaching this a little bit more, because that's a bit more generalizable than just should we be setting this EKU bit or not, because I think we'll kind of be stuck there for a while. So if this is more, you have a certain need for your PKI, which is not met by the tooling, maybe that's the better way to approach this. Which I would say the challenge there, of course, is trying to have conformance across all of the clients. If there's something specifically in cosign we can do, that's probably where I would focus your energy, assuming that Go is what you're using and cosign works for that use case. Which, for what it's worth, I think that's more or less what the issue asks for, which is just cosign. Again, I'm kind of talking like ideally we move towards a state where all of the clients support some sort of private PKI, but it's going to take time. I know a lot of clients have different opinions on what that UX should look like as well. Even in cosign as well, we'd love to kind of split out these private PKI use cases from the official Sigstore verification. So
maybe a proposed path forward here is we could create a PR and maybe a separate issue on cosign and propose having a default option that exists and operates the way it does today. And then you could pass in a flag to turn out that code signing bit. I know how that works with the conformance also, but would that be a path forward just to keep the conversation going?
Yes, and I'll say maybe one small bit on that is just thinking through what that API looks like. So again, I'd love to see it not just be about whether that EKU bit is set or not, but a part of maybe starting to move toward this direction of having an API structured around private PKI needs. Really, I mean, this is sort of just wrapping this all in maybe some sort of options struct. But whoever's making that change, if some thought can be given to that, that would be good. And I think I'd be good getting that merged in.
Okay. Thank you. That gives me kind of a path forward to keep the conversation going. And I will go work that.
Okay, awesome. And yeah, feel free also if you want to set up any more time to chat as well. Feel free to post on the issue and we can find some time.
Okay.
Awesome. Tanner.
I just wanted to jump in really quick because it's somewhat related to that. We recently were interested in CRL support for our certificates, and it feels like along the same lines of supporting your own private PKI. And I was just curious what the thought was there. In the last call that we were on, which was the, what was that? I don't know. It was last week. We were told that the best path forward is either support tough or do CRL outside of the client. And I just wanted to check in here because it feels related to that. If that's the consensus on this call as well, if that's our best path forward or not.
So I have more opinions on krills than EKUs, which can be good or bad. This has come up before. The way that we've looked at this is actually, again, the exact same problem, which is you have certain needs for your private PKI. One question I have is this something where we'd want to see all clients conform to this requirement that there be some support for krills, or is this something where we're saying, well, let's again kind of treat cosign as the de facto client for supporting private PKI use cases, at which point we could build krill support in there. For what it's worth, I'm not against krills. We know that, again, for the public instance or for the Sigstore official spec, we don't see krills as part of that. But I do know that folks need support for it. So I'd be okay adding it, honestly, in whatever way we're also talking about for this EKU thing to start fleshing this out. I would say that, again, excuse me, tough is the direction I'd love to see us go, but I also recognize that tough is heavyweight. And for certain deployments or for existing PKI, that doesn't necessarily work. So maybe what I'd ask is if you want to write up a proposal about how this, what you'd like to see, what are your needs, and how we can fit that into Cosign's existing API, I think that would be good. You know, from a purely technical standpoint, adding support for Quills is fairly straightforward because it's just going to be a few calls to what already exists in Go. And I'm actually looking right now. I feel like we might have an issue tracking this at one point. I will say, as kind of a larger meta comment here, as part of the refactors we'd like to do in Cosign going forward, I would love to give a lot of thought around how we support these use cases, both from an API perspective and from a CLI perspective. So for example, I expect Sigstore Go would not be the integration point for a lot of this because Sigstore Go is primarily focused around the spec compliant signing and verification. I expect Cosign to be that place to fill in the gaps around private PKI use cases. So I'd like to do this in kind of a clean way. Again, I recognize that without stopping doing a massive refactor of Cosign and then adding these in, like, we're just blocking everybody who has these private PKI use cases, which I don't want to do. But I think that's just kind of one thing that I want to mention that's in the back of my head, which is how best to support this. I will say we I'm going to post this. This was thoughts from 2 years ago from me, which I'm just going to say are probably outdated. But this is an issue where somebody had asked for revocation previously. So feel free to file another issue and we can deduplicate these later because I don't know, again, what I was thinking at the time. My opinions have changed quite a lot around certificates, but.
Sure, yeah. So just to repeat back at you, just to make sure I got everything, and for some extra context, we have a fork of Sigstore RS that implements our CRM support. And so what we're trying to figure out is how long we need to maintain that fork and if there's a path forward for us to integrate in our solution. And a lot of that is just like figuring out what the desired API is. And our hesitation was we noticed no one else implemented it. So we just thought that it was either not desired to be in those implementations. And so we were trying to figure out a path around that. But
yeah, the main thing to note is that all of the Sigstore Dash clients, for the most part, are focused on the spec compliance Sigstore signing and verification, which is why you don't see things like Krills. Cosign, just because of its history, is where a lot of this has been implemented. I will say I don't know exactly what the Sigstore REST maintainers want to do around support for private PKI. So I would say filing an issue there makes sense. Again, if you're thinking about Cosign, I can speak to that. But I don't know exactly what their API looks like and how we fit in the private PKI use case. I don't know if they have previous examples of where they were supporting this. But I would say at the very least, filing an issue to start talking about this, I think would be good.
Cool. I can do that. Thanks.
Awesome. Cool. I'll just kind of leave the floor open if anybody else has anything else that they want to chat about. Again, we don't have any major updates. While I'm doing this, I'll drop a link to the GitHub GA. Alrighty. Last calls. Anything else anybody wants to chat about? Alrighty. Well, thank you all for the great discussions. I look forward to chatting some more on issues as well. Have a good couple weeks. See you all around.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.